Making disciples is a church's primary mission. And this week, we're talking in our series on disciple making with Joe Reed. Joe is the founder of Exponent Group, a national ministry dedicated to discipling people and based here in New England. I'm Charles Galda, president of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles.
Hey, so maybe just by way of introduction, if you give a little bit of biography of yourself, of where you're from, how'd you wind up in New England, and then we'll talk about what Exponent is.
Sure. Well, the most important thing is I'm Natalie's husband. That's always at the top of the line. So she's way better than I am in so many ways. We were church planters in Northeast Indiana, right at an early part of our career. And then the Lord called us into missions, and we were overseas in South Africa for about 5 years before we relocated to New England, actually 10 years ago yesterday. So we are a decade into Boston, Massachusetts.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
And so how did you wind up at Exponent? Was it coming back from the mission field? You started looking at different things and...
Yeah, the short version of that is I was working for another missions organization. At the time, they were called Church Resource Ministries. They're now called Novo Missions. And the short version of this is that healthcare, obviously, as a missionary, getting mass health is a big benefit to doing missions work in Massachusetts. And because of the way that the healthcare laws have been written, I was going to have to raise an additional $24,000 to $25,000 for health coverage. And instead of doing that, we decided we would start our own organization with some friends. And we had been discussing the need for some kind of an innovation lab for the sake of the church and missions anyway. And so instead of just building that on the side as a side project, we built it as what is now Exponent Group, when we have about 6 of us on full-time staff now, pretty robust board across the country. And so that's a little bit of why we formed it up.
And what does Exponent do?
Yeah, so we really exist to help individuals and organizations think about how to multiply healthy discipleship. And so we're kind of that B2B consulting for ministries, and really focusing on how do we cultivate those missionary practices in the everyday life. That's a little bit of how it works.
Do you find that most of us have good discipleship practices that we need help figuring out how to make multiply, or do most of us start a step back from that if we don't have good discipleship practices?
I think it's so I don't like to throw anybody under the bus on this. I think it's a mix, right? We come into a lot of situations where there's good ministry happening, but perhaps like prayer practices may not be as deep as they might want to be in that context. So how do we help cultivate healthier prayer practices and guide people in a more spiritual direction avenue? In other situations, it's a very big lack of missionary skills that I would call being able to reach out into non-Christian spaces. So everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and they're not the same. And so I think we all do, right? And I think I have a lot of weaknesses that my team and definitely my wife has been helpful in shaping up. But yeah, by and large, I would say we all struggle, and we're all uniquely gifted in certain areas.
And so so it sounds like there's 2 models. It sounds like there's you help a ministry, but you also help people, right?
Yes.
Individuals. And so let's talk about them separately from it. So if I come to you and I'm a leader in a church and I'm saying, hey, look, I'm not sure what I need to do. How do we engage with each other? Is there a standard process you bring people through? What does it look like?
I mean, really, honestly, Charles, because every situation is so unique, we want to get on a call like this. And I just want to hear, and I want to ask a lot of questions about you as a person, you as a leader, your context in terms of the community that you're serving, and then the organization. Usually that's the last part of my conversation with anyone, because I recognize that you are an individual and you have some things that you're working through. Your context is also very important because that's where you're doing ministry. It's where your organization is predominantly focused. And then you have a culture within your organization. So we really want to understand the full picture before we just kind of come in and say, here are all these ideas that we want to begin to work on with you. we have some standard things that we really are passionate about, prayer practices that we put in front of everyone, specific listening skills in the field, how to ask spiritual questions with non-Christians, how to start a discovery Bible study. Those kinds of things are pretty standard, but by and large, how we get started is really contextual.
And I'm guessing, by the way, it sounds almost like, as opposed to, hey, this is a curriculum and training, this is more like a consulting engagement. There may be some standard things in our toolkit we tend to draw on more because of the needs, but it's really, I need to understand you and your context and then figure out what the right answers are for you.
Yeah, we do have some pretty good standardized processes that
Mm,
most people end up finding their way into, but we don't usually know which way to order it until we really understand who we're dealing with. The other
mm,
factor to this too, Charles, is we really put a lot of emphasis around coaching and spiritual direction. So part of the interaction that I want to have with the leader and the leadership team of those communities, I'm trying to gauge really what is the culture of this group and what's the right coach to pair with these guys.
mm,
Not everybody fits with everybody else. Some people resonate with my personality, others with other people on my team, and we just want to make sure that those matches
mm.
are as close to being good chemistry as possible.
And so tell me, if you will, because for some, the spiritual direction thing we were talking
Mhm.
about not too long ago in one of our radio programs, but it's not something that is natural in a lot of our traditions. It's a newer phrase even that's getting a lot of
Sure.
traction. What is spiritual direction?
Yeah, I like to discuss it more like most people are familiar with the idea of a midwife, right?
Mm,
So we actually, for our third child, my wife used a midwife, and in that, this is she obviously my wife is the one holding this baby and about to give birth to our son, and the midwife is there to actually help pay attention to everything that's going on in her and around her, and to help her focus to really understand what's happening. And I think spiritual direction is kind of like that as well. God is clearly birthing something in the individual in prayer. And often that discernment process can be quite challenging to walk out alone. And so I think of spiritual direction kind of like midwifery, where they are walking alongside. If I'm spiritual directing with someone, I'm walking alongside and I'm asking clarifying questions. I'm not giving any of my own assumptions. I'm not coaching. I'm not giving you new ministry skills. It's none of that teaching. It's really helping you pay attention to God in a deeper kind of way. So it's really more of a guide approach. It's not counseling and it's not coaching. It really is kind of its own third category in several ways.
But it does sound like there's kind of a common theme with what I understand in therapy is it's a lot more asking questions than giving
It really
answers. Is that
is.
fair?
And honestly, they're there to actually help you listen to God and help you hear God's voice. So by the second we start entering into a space where we're giving instruction, sometimes that can create confusion. So all of our spiritual directors are really skilled and trained to really guide someone into deeper prayer and discernment in those ways. Yes,
And it's ironic because for a lot of us, it's a newer term, but it really
sure.
has a very long pedigree in the church.
Yeah, and I agree with you. When I first interacted with spiritual direction, I was a little taken back by it, to be honest, because it was coming from a tradition that wasn't one that I'd grown up in. And
Mm,
as I started to study it, it was like, honestly, this isn't that different than being in a really good community that with leaders that can ask really helpful questions and really guide me. And so pastors in my life were doing spiritual direction without having that term, but I
mm,
think that there's so much more study and practice that's gone into this tradition throughout church history, that it's something for our kind of tribe in the faith to really pay attention to and to learn from. I would really encourage it. More and more folks in our denominations are starting to take a hold of this.
Is it something that really the notion of a role of spiritual director is filling a gap in that we all should be doing this with other people, or am I thinking about it wrong?
No, I think we can. These are actually, I was having a call with someone this morning about this. I think that that is a skill that we can teach to other believers to help other believers do that. I'm adamant. I'm kind of on a soapbox on these days around this, Charles. I believe that we need to increase this skill in the body across the
Mhm.
board. Our ability to listen is so absent from so many parts of society, but even especially, if I can say it that way, in the church. So helping to listen to one another and to hear God's voice, I think it brings a lot of it really solves a lot of the internal conflicts in congregation life by helping people really turn their hearts back to the Lord. So I think this is a skill that can be learned.
And so part of what we're going to do is there's going to be a spiritual direction component of this for me as the pastor or for the governance group of the church or somebody
So
else.
yeah, that's a great question. I am really concerned about the senior leadership of a congregation. I'm also very concerned about any of the leaders within the body that are going to help facilitate further training and coaching. I wanted to make sure that all of the leadership structures are really well cared for. Beyond that, obviously I want everyone to experience spiritual direction. I think everyone should have a director in their life.
Mhm.
I think it's a really core role. But from our engagement at Exponent Group, we're really focusing on those really 2 to 3 leaders in an organization that we wanna make sure we're providing that with, in terms of our engagement with them.
And so this may be an unfair question, a little bit of a side journey, but when I think about I've been doing a lot of reading about Wesley classes
Mhm.
around spiritual formation. And so, is it your impression? And I don't, that's why I say I don't know if that's in your tradition, but is it your impression that that's what's going on in a group setting, or was it different, or is that, or am I taking you down a path you're
No,
not
I
ready?
think I actually was, I went to Wesleyan Seminary, so it's
Oh,
in my wheelhouse. So,
so,
yeah,
so, then,
I
so then I'm asking this due to your deep expertise on this
yeah,
topic.
exactly. No, I would say, like, I think about it in 2 ways. We actually provide both individual and group direction.
Hmm.
So the answer is yes, and there's a bit of a nuance. I actually meet with my personal spiritual director every month, every 4 to 6 weeks. But then obviously I'm in my own community, and there's a small group of us that are doing regular reflection together, and they're different. It's a different angle on the same kind of concept, if I will. And so it just adds more shade to the imagery of what God is trying to communicate to us, I think.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, so part of what we're going to do is spiritual direction together. What
Yes.
what else are we going to do?
Yeah, we usually work with churches through a fairly long process of missionary equipping is the way we try to frame it up. Everyone is a missionary where they live, work, and play. And so, how do you pay attention to where God's at work? How do you identify spiritually open people? How do you begin to engage them in spiritual conversations? How do you begin to disciple people into faith and then into maturity? All of this is the stuff that we're working on. There are skills that we're going to help train, but we're more interested in our process around building real life ministry plans with the entirety of the church. We work in 3 phases usually with a congregation. Our goal at Exponent Group really is that the majority of the congregation doesn't really know we were involved. We want to equip leaders within that body to be doing that work, doing the stuff, as John Wimber used to say, make sure that everyone is doing the stuff.
Mhm.
But then there's a few within a body that are actually equipped and gifted to train others and equip others beyond the pastor and the pastoral staff. Because what we don't want to do is add more pressure on pastoral staff right now. We want to release them to be more of the equippers of the saints to do the work of the ministry. And so, we come alongside that effort, and we're working with leadership within the congregation to provide not only the doing of the things, but the training of new skills in the rest of the body. So, over the course of a year or so, we're working in waves. So, we'll work directly with a first wave. And as they're doing ministry and they're learning new skills, we begin to teach them to recruit others in the body,
Mhm.
train them, and release them into ministry as well. So we're working in that kind of a sequence. So it's a longer process, but throughout the entirety of it, we're really trying to help seed healthy ministry practice into the entire body of the congregation.
Hmm. Interesting. So at some point, I presume that starts to translate into the ministry plan for the church, as you were just saying, but maybe even vision, mission, kind of stuff
It
too.
comes up later. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so now that's what you're doing as a church engagement, and it sounds like almost like it's a revitalization effort, even though the church might not be in a failing state, but it's a revitalization of the fundamental things we're supposed to be doing in a church: make
That's
disciples.
fair. Yeah, that's
And
fair.
and so now talk a little bit on the individual side, because it sounds you're saying you work with individuals too. What does that look like?
Okay, so two different kinds of ways here. One, we are all missionaries on staff. I mean, we're first and foremost, that's why we're here. So I'm actively pursuing what we would call a person of peace, someone that's open to the Lord, but is not yet walking with him. And so I'm constantly looking at individuals and I'm trying to have spiritual conversations myself. I'm trying to draw people into discipling relationships as well. But then on top of that, we have individual Christians that come to us often, and usually that's where we start. Charles, is people
Mhm.
from their church. They're not coming to represent their church. They're just wanting to be more effective in their workplace or in their neighborhood, and so they stumble across our resources that we give out for free. I think you even get some of our emails every other week. We just want to get tools into the hands of the body, so they stumble onto that, and then they call us up and we interact with them in very specific ways. It's similar to what we do with a church, but usually what we'll do, Charles, when they really want to go deep, is we actually push it back to them and say, hey, we want you to go find 3 or 4 others that you're going to walk this out with,
Mhm.
and we'll work with your team because we believe deeply in that doing ministry alone is a bad idea. It's
Mhm.
really unhealthy. And so we even want the outside of any of our individual engagement to move quickly towards community. We want to do this in and through community the entire way through.
Does that challenge of go get 3 or 4 cause any serious attrition? Or
Oh
does
yeah, and that's usually why I do it. Honestly, we don't have a lot of capacity for a lot of one-on-one calls. And
Mm,
the reality is I've just seen too many times in the 20 years I've been in missions and ministry where that just falls. It always fails when it's a solo person going on their own.
yeah.
So I'm kind of doing it like, hey, if you don't want to do this with other people, this probably isn't going to work anyway. So, you know, lovingly challenge you and move you on your own way. Take our resources and read them,
Mm.
but I'm looking for us to actually see transformation in individual life. And then I want to see the spread of transformation beyond that team. So that it's a prerequisite for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. Justin Kendrick has been on a couple of times. I think you probably know Justin
Oh
from Barry,
yeah.
who wrote "Bury Your Ordinary," and he is very intentional about introducing tests into the disciple making process to see how serious you are. So, go share your faith with this person. I was like the one who's you have to identify who the person you're most afraid to share your faith with, and now you have to go share your faith with that person, which
I
is an
love it.
exercise and a test, right?
It really
And
is.
and so it sounds like there's a little bit of that in what you're doing there too. Of go get 3 or 4 people.
Absolutely.
We'll see if you're serious.
Well, and honestly, and last thing I'll say before we move on to the other parts of the conversation, we talk a lot about, discipleship is really ultimately an obedience move. And I know we hate that word,
Mhm.
but the Great Commission was teach them to obey, not teach them all of the things that I've ever said. It was teach
Yeah,
them obedience. And so if we're not going to do the simple of things, are we really discipling and
yeah,
are we disciples?
yeah. And teaching them to obey necessitates teaching them what I said, but it doesn't
Sure.
stop there, right?
Right, right, right.
And so you mentioned resources. So what kind of resources and tools do you guys create, share, have for people?
Well, there's a lot of things on your website that I think we've shared before too. I mean, there's so much out there on content. We tend to focus them on like 3 main areas, though I would say. Henry Nouwen wrote about this, so it's really coming from him. This is not original to us at all, but that prayer practice. So Henry Nouwen used to call it communion in God. So resources around prayer practices and deepening our own intimacy with the Lord would be one bucket. Another bucket would be around community and team and how to form that up. And then the third bucket would be around ministry effectiveness. So missionary skills and things of that nature. Those are the 3 main buckets. And we have created some of our own prayer practices, prayer guides. That stuff I think you can get for free on our website. Our ministry equipping stuff,
Mhm.
is more in the form of an e-course paired with a coaching engagement. So we've created it. So the idea was we're repeating ourselves so much, and that's fine. We're going to do it all day, but we want to put tools in people's hands that they can remember the conversations that we had and reflect on it over and over again. It's all about repetition. I was actually teaching my son last night how to parallel park, and it was 20 different times. I was standing there and the police were watching me, and 20 different times we're doing it over and over and over again. And I just got the text he passed his road test today. So practice, practice, practice. Yeah, and watch out for my kid, everybody. He's definitely he's on the road.
But we don't think, I think for a lot of us, at least when we read, all scripture is good training for righteousness and right, train yourself for godliness and all. We don't think that means practice, practice, practice. We just kind of think it's a concept.
Yeah, know it. If I know it, one of the things that I say, and this gets me in trouble in rooms, so we'll see how this lands on the show. I think, especially in New England, especially in Boston, we know more about the scriptures and about the Lord than we could ever possibly be obedient to in the rest of our lifetimes. We just do. We're brilliant. But we're not putting it into practice by and large. And I think that's really that's a big problem.
Mm. Yeah, I've been on my own journey. We're all on our own journey, and that's
Sure.
been striking to me too. Is this this issue of um, we are meant to teach them to obey, and Jesus doesn't give commandments you can't do. So it's actually possible then to teach them to obey, which means it's possible for me to obey, which means, right? But we've missed this training in righteousness piece and the
Hmm.
practice and the exercise, even though Paul uses those kinds of words, Jesus does too, but Paul writes about it a lot. And we somehow read it and miss it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so Gordon MacDonald has said a couple of times in some of our stuff, we read superficially. And I feel convicted by that because that's a good reason. I don't have a better answer for why I'm missing it.
It's that, and I think it poses the question of: are we willing to ask each other the hard questions?
Mm,
You know what I mean? So, like Charles, you said this last week, you read this last week, but you're not doing anything about it. Why? What's the roadblock there?
yeah.
To me, that is one of the hardest discipling questions we could ask each other. But it's important because the training in righteousness is to, hey, that's not the nature of the Lord, and He wants that on you. He wants that in your
Mm.
life. Why don't we lovingly and accurately ask that question more often? These are the things that we want to wrestle with.
And part of it is we don't give permission to somebody in our lives to ask us those questions, or
That's
right.
true.
And so people don't feel safe, and it's going to jeopardize, and it's not my job, and all that. And so as a result, which really does speak to a level of missing community, I think.
I think that's really true.
Right. And so what our appetite a little bit? What's the next tool coming down the pike or resource you guys are working on?
Yeah, one of the things that I've wrestled with a lot of pastors, a lot of other ministries is, do we know really what people are going through, and are we tracking the right things in our current metric system? Do we know the formation pathways of people and the journeys that they're on? And then are they being resourced effectively into that formation journey? And so, part of the challenge too is you go to any church, and my question is, why are you choosing the sermon series that you're choosing? Some of it's church calendar, which I appreciate a lot from my tradition. Others, it's, I just sense it in the spirit. Others, that's just what we're doing. There really is no rhyme or reason. And we're coming up with a tool now. It's a technology resource. We're building a piece of software right now. We're testing it all in New England. And the idea behind it, Charles, is how do we be actively reflecting on the formation of those we are discipling? So if you're a small group leader, the people in your small group, as an example,
Mm.
how do we reflect more frequently on that? Begin to see sort of the trend line. These are the areas that they're strong in, and these are the areas that they're a little bit more weak in and that we need more development on. Now we're going a little bit further with that in the technology. The idea is not just to monitor that in a reflective survey pathway, because any survey tool can do that. We're actually going to be building we're calling it a just-in-time resource delivery. So instead of guessing at what book to read or guessing at what tool to use in a situation, based on the results of your surveys and the reports that are coming forward, the machine is actually going to spit out specific resources based on what's going on in that individual's life. So you, as the disciple maker, can pull that up, review it, and then engage more accurately in your next engagement with them. So it's called Pulse. How do you keep a pulse on the formation of the individuals of what's going on? And so that we're going to be testing it. We're actually kicking off our testing groups this Friday, and all here in New England. And we're hoping to be able to release this hopefully by the fall. But I'm learning about technology. It never goes as planned. So here we are.
And so am I hearing you right? So if I'm in a disciple making relationship and there's a person I'm discipling and we've realized together that gossip is a problem for them,
Sure.
then the tool is going to point me to resources, whether that's reading, podcast, challenges, what have you, about, well, here's right. Because I don't feel equipped. I don't know how to help somebody whose problem is gossip, or pick your vice, right? Is that what
Exactly.
we're getting at?
Exactly. So that way you're not going through, why would you, if they're dealing with gossip, why are we taking them to the latest financial health materials? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So let's get them directly to that piece. And so every church or organization will have the capacity to customize the questions that they ask and the resources that they suggest to their community. Because what we've recognized is that everyone uses different language, different words for everything, and they have their preference, whether it's theological or just personality or whatever, that they want to suggest certain things and not other things. And we just didn't want to get in the middle of all that. We can come alongside and make some hard suggestions and ask you really hard questions about it and your choice selection. But at the end of the day, it's yours, right? So you would log in as an organization. You're building that all out. Our team will help you with that. And that's kind of the idea. So direct resources on the specific issues going on.
Fascinating. And so how do you fund something like that?
Well,
Building apps in ministry right now. I'm sure somebody is. I just don't know them.
yeah, so we are right now. We had some generous donations from a couple of good friends to help us kick off this particular leg of the project. And we are getting close to where I feel confident I could pre-sell it. We're not really sure where the price points are going to go. My passion is that any individual that's going after disciple making is going to be able to log in and use this tool by themselves for free. And so we're working on that on our end. We're fundraising for it. We're trying to keep it all inside of the nonprofit. I was speaking with some of our mutual friends about this. I'm really passionate. I understand the nature of building out a whole business around it. That's all well and good, and I appreciate where that goes. But right now, this has to be a tool for the sake of the mission that we're all on together. And I want to make sure that we're able to stay laser focused on the core mission of this tool. So we're doing everything we can to raise donor dollars to help get this into the hands of more churches, more ministries, more disciple makers, and also so that we can keep the cost way down, and so it's not prohibitive for anyone to jump into it. Obviously, we'll have our costs that we have to cover and all of those things, but we really want to make this affordable and accessible for everyone.
And so if I want to find out more about other stuff Exponent does, other resources available, or how I might even contribute to something like that, where do I go?
Yeah, so you can go to our website. It's www.exponentgroup.org. And if you'd like to get added to our newsletters that go out every 2 to 3 weeks, we're not soliciting anything. We're just giving away free content, free resources. I think that goes out every 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. You can sign up on the website there. And if you'd like to engage with us, there's our call to action button is a form. And based on whatever you want to engage with us on, you just click a button. It'll ask you a few specific questions on that. And that information will come to my team and we'll be in touch with you.
That's great. That's great. 2 minutes left, Joe. What have I not asked you about that you think is important to get into this conversation and on people's radar screens?
That's a really great question. I'd written something down, so let me pull something up. I'm really passionate, and I'm getting older, I don't know, and tired of trying to convince people to do the things that I like. I think every situation is just so unique. I'm really passionate about this notion that there's not a silver bullet for anything. And so my encouragement, whether or not we ever engage with anybody that's listening to this right now or not, is that be flexible. I just think that that's the thing that I'm really concerned most about, is that we don't want to get locked into a way other than the word and the community and the Spirit of God. I don't think we should be boxing ourselves in on strategies.
Yeah.
I think we've created an idol out of it and too many times, and the Lord wants to be a lot more creative than that. So I just want to release freedom into the body that's listening to this, that you have the freedom of the word, your community, and the Spirit, and go with those three things.
Mm. Great words to end on. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for
got it,
your
brother.
ministry, but thank you for being with us today too. I appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you for your ministry, Charles. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Thanks. And I'd like to thank our producer, Jess Mangano, and our listeners. This program is created by Vision New England, which accelerates evangelism by helping the church make disciples, do justice, fostering unity, so people want to know Jesus and their lives are transformed. And you heard Joe, exponentgroup.org for more information on Exponent. You can find other resources at visionnewengland.org. This program is brought to you by our friends, the Luis Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaim the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.